Welcome, everybody, to the Third and Gold podcast presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors. I'm Tyler James, and I'm joined, as always, by the one and only Eric Hansen. Together, we cover Notre Dame football, recruiting, and more for blueandgold.com on the On3 network. Notre Dame's second off week is in the rearview mirror. The Irish will begin their 5-game close to the regular season on Saturday at Boston College. For an outside perspective on Notre Dame, we reached out this week to Pro Football Focus analyst Dalton Wasserman. Dalton is the co-host of the PFF College Football Show, and Notre Dame is frequently a topic of discussion. Dalton, thanks for joining us.
Anytime, guys. It's always good to talk about Notre Dame and just the fascinating part of this playoff race with them, especially with once again trying to put together a 10-game win streak and make their way into it.
Yeah, been a fascinating way that the season has come together once again. I wanted to start on offense. We entered the season talking about Jeremiyah Love and Jadarian Price as in the conversation for the best running back duo in the country, and it seems like they've sort of ended that conversation already. What do you see from that duo that makes them so special?
Any point game, you can go to either one of them and they can give you action, right? Obviously, both of them creating explosive runs at any time. Now that they've got Jeremiyah Love really back into rhythm, and it looks like he's healthy off of the ankle injury he had in the playoff last year, and you can just go to him at any time you want. And I think the fact that even at moments when they're struggling or they can fall behind in games, that's such a luxury to have two guys. Let's say one's not in a rhythm, you go to the other one, and boom, you have a top 10 to 12 back in the country in Price, right? So I think it's just the diversity of what they're able to do. And now that they've gotten Love more involved in the passing game, that only adds to that.
Dalton, I'm wondering, when you look at CJ Carr, what do you see from the eye test, and does it match up with the scores that you've had for him this year?
Yeah, he's been really solid. There's been an occasional mistake, but not too many. I think the bigger thing that I see with Carr and Notre Dame's offense in general is just an occasional spurt of, sometimes just not finishing drives, right? We saw that a couple times in the Boise State game. We saw it with the interception in the USC game. That was probably his worst throw of the season. I just think there's moments where, like any young quarterback, he's got to get a little bit better in opponent's territory and down in the red zone. But otherwise, I think Carr's been outstanding. He really has. And figuring this thing out on the fly, winning the competition early over Kenny Minchie, and going through those two losses early in the season against two of the best teams in the country, as it turns out, I think he's been really good overall. And I think it just comes down to, if I was picking one of the bigger flaws in Notre Dame's offense, and there's very, very few of them, to be honest, it's just finishing drives and getting through and scoring touchdowns in the red zone. Once they get that going, this offense really does look borderline unstoppable.
Dalton, the quarterback piece of it has been something obviously Notre Dame's always searching for, and we've seen that with Notre Dame going through the transfer portal market in the previous seasons to try to solve that issue. But the wide receiver issue has been sort of a constant too, in terms of, does Notre Dame have high enough level receivers to compete in the college football playoff? What do you think of this group of Notre Dame's wide receivers?
Honestly, I like them better than ever. I like them better even than last year's group, right? Jordan Faison has been outstanding this year. He's really stepped up. Malachi Fields, with the big size that he gives you on the outside to win those one-on-one matchups. At tight end, Eli Raridon, there's always a Notre Dame tight end that's stepping up too, and Raridon's been a fantastic asset lately. Love being added. Will Pauling from Wisconsin's always had potential, and he's really good in the slot. He's been their best receiver the last couple of years, and now he's coming and contributed to this team. The only thing that surprises me is we haven't seen more of Jaden Greathouse, and he was so good at the end of last year. Only 4 catches this year, but that group and that depth I really think is better than even they had last year, and it's a big reason for Carr's success.
I like the fact that you have individual grades for all the offensive linemen, and then you can kind of get a collective what the team is doing from pass blocking and run blocking. When you look at Notre Dame collectively, and there's been a lot of moving pieces lately, do you see a line that could still be in the Joe Moore Award conversation for a while, or do you think maybe top 24 is kind of their ceiling?
I think they would still have to finish with a hot last 5 games, and they have the ability to do that. They could dominate all these teams in the trenches. I think the slow start that they got off to really gives you kind of, the first impression can be a lot, and there's some really good, some candidates for that award. I think Iowa sticks out to me. Cincinnati's got a really underrated line. Indiana's offensive line has been outstanding. So I think there's some really good candidates. But no, I mean, if they were to dominate down the stretch here, and you talk about with the run game, especially in the way that Jeremiyah Love and Jadarian Price have put together so many rushing yards in the last handful of weeks, I still think it's possible. Probably a bit of an underdog right now, but I like that they're getting better and getting more cohesive as the season goes on here.
I think we'll mix in a little bit. I know some people have heard you on our podcast last year when you went through some of the basics of the scoring system and so forth. But one thing that I wanted to ask you when you were going through that about the offensive lineman, let's say Notre Dame is playing Boston College this week, and then let's say Emil Wagner gets a 70, and then he plays Miami. Is that 70 mean as much? Does the competition level mean as much when you're going against Ruben Bain versus whoever Boston College has at defensive end? Do you know what I'm saying? Is that 70, or do you grade on a curve? Do you say, well, my gosh, this guy's going against Ruben Bain Jr. of Miami?
So nothing's graded on a curve because we just grade every individual play as it is, and then the end result is what it is. So that part is kind of, you kind of have to infer a bit when you're looking at the grades going, okay, what is the context of this? When I look at, Notre Dame, say their pass blocking grades, and I look at them, and every week they're just about solid, except for the Miami week where they were out of 25. Well, I can tell you, too, that Miami's doing that to just about every team in the country they're playing this year. So you do kind of just have to take that into account, kind of make some inferences and dig in and go, okay, why is the Miami game the outlier? Well, because they have maybe the best defensive line in the country. So nothing's graded on a curve because we try to grade every individual play the same, play to play, no matter who you're going against. So, same goes if they go against Boston College this week and their pass blocking grade is a 90 or something like that. Well, then they dominated Boston College, and there could be other reasons for that as far as the opponent. But something you just kind of have to look into for yourself there. There isn't a curve as far as that goes. We just grade every game the same.
Cool.
Dalton, is grading offensive linemen, is that one of the more difficult tasks?
Yeah, I would say so. Just because you're looking at so many, especially if you have a team that runs so many different concepts in the run game, especially pass protection, I would say is a little bit easier because it's a lot of one-on-one battles, and then you have to infer into some stunts and blitz pickups and things like that. But I would say those are the ones that really, obviously, we get the end zone cam eventually with all 22, and those are the ones that really get the highest level of evaluation from the all 22 once we get the end zone shot. So we get a pretty good framework, obviously, when we do it through the first run. But yeah, offensive line work is, for me at least, I would say, especially in the run game, those are the most difficult because there's so many little details about who's in what gap and how far over is the shade and things like that for each defensive lineman. So it's a lot of fun to do for sure. But I would say, yeah, that's the hardest part to break down.
And then when you just look at the like if you went through and you didn't have labels on these teams, could you tell like who's a top 10 team, who's a team that's got 2 wins on the year if you just kind of looked at their collective scores without the labels on them?
Yeah, it correlates pretty well, honestly. You look at most of, if I just look at the overall grades of just about, say the top 20 teams here and what they have in the overall grades, there's not very many. There's certainly not one with a losing record. Actually, there's one with a losing record because they dominated their lesser opponents. College football can be weird like that, where you can kind of tilt the scales a little bit when you dominate those lesser opponents. Florida State is a team that sticks out to me here, but no, it correlates really well. You look at the top 15 teams in our overall grading, and they're all really darn good teams, and just about every one of them is still in the playoff race. So, right now, Indiana, just on the grading, on the individual play-by-play grading, they're the highest graded team in the country. But yeah, they'll give you a pretty good correlation as far as who is playing well, because that's the idea, is the grades are meant to reflect the tape, and the tape, if a team has really good tape every week, they're probably going to win a lot of games.
Dalton, another, sort of in the weeds question about grading. We produce stories each week with sort of takeaways from the offense and defense grades for Notre Dame following a game. And our readers started to point out instances where it seemed like the offense as a whole played better, but maybe there's only a couple of guys that have high grades, and the defense maybe didn't play as well, but there's more guys with high grades. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I never really noticed that before. And then I looked up sort of the team offense and team defense grades nationally, and it seemed to significantly favor the defense. Right now, this morning I looked, there was 32 teams with offense grades of 80 plus and 83 teams with defense grades of 80 plus. I'm curious, like, why is that? Is there something inherent in the scoring Does it have to do with defensive rotation that allows for people to score higher? I'm curious, what's your perspective on that?
I think generally what I see, because such a heavy part of the offensive grading goes into offensive line play. So you could have a team that, overall is dragged down a little bit by their offensive line. I look at a team like a Vanderbilt, where like their quarterback and their skill players have played so well, but their offensive line, their grading is pretty low on the scale. So it can be dragged down a bit by that. There's certain teams that get kind of carried by the skill players. I think that would be the biggest factor in it. Is, look, college offensive lines, it's just there's not that many elite units, right? When you look at, say, the Iowas or Missouri, it's as an example, Indiana's offensive line, Ohio State's offensive line, even Notre Dame's, Atlanta, those have been really good units this year, but you don't see that many who are just all around dominant. And that's what makes those teams so great, right? Is that they are dominating in the trenches. I would say that's the biggest reason for it. And look, there's certain schemes where, teams can work around an average or so offensive line and then find a way to just get their athletes in space, right? I think about a team like a Georgia Tech that's really good at that they can get their athletes in space, and that's how they keep winning ball games and controlling the pace of it. So I would say that's the biggest reason. It's just you don't have that many super dominant offensive lines in college football.
I got a couple of basics questions. I'll do you rapid fire, just again for people that aren't familiar. I think I know the answer. I think you guys start with a default score of 60, and then it goes up and down from that.
Correct.
And so when we share the numbers with our readers behind the paywall, what does a 75 mean? What does a 90 mean? Because I think the grades don't correlate to what they got in school. They see it like a 68 and they think they got a D or a C minus, and that probably isn't. So what do the numbers mean once you get above 60?
Yeah, so you talk about a 60 being kind of the baseline, like just kind of at a neutral level, did your job throughout the game on a total basis. And that once you start getting into the high 60s and towards the mid 70s, you had like a solid game. Or if you have that across the whole season, you're like a solid player. You're like a starting caliber player. You go, okay, this guy's a really a contributor, right? Once you start getting into the high 70s into the mid 80s, you go, man, this is a plus. This is probably for the season one of our 6 to 8 best players on our team, or some teams that are real dominant. You talk about having more of those guys is great, but you're talking about plus starting caliber players, or like say an 80 grade for a game. You go, man, he was probably one of the 5 or 6 best players on this team for this individual game. Once you start getting into the 90s, upper 80s and 90s, you talk about for an individual game, there's a chance that that guy was the best player on the field, or for the season, that's one of the best players in the country. I think about a Ruben Bain Jr. is the highest graded defensive player in the country. He's around a 94 for the season right now. So yeah, when you look at those guys getting into the 90s for a whole season, and then even for an individual game, you go, okay, that's a guy I look at as one of the 2 or 3 best players on the field, if not the best player on the field on a given day or in a given season.
And then my follow-up to it is that a question I get sometimes is, let's say a guy has a season score of 75, but he's never actually been above 75. All his games are lower than that. So what's the difference in grading a game versus grading a full season?
So the season, and it's not just an average of the grades, because there will be a bump. Let's say, who's a great example of this right now on the NFL level is Daniel Jones. Like I look at Daniel Jones, and every week his game grades are right about that mark, right around a 73 to 75. Shane Steichen's calling great plays, and Jones is doing a great job of executing what he's asked, and he's playing at a solidly, consistently above average level. But the grades for the season will kind of take into account that level of consistency, right? Because, it's hard to play with that level of consistency every single week, as opposed to, a lot of guys will have, a couple of games at an 80 and then a game at a 50 where he struggles, and it can be up and down sometimes. So it kind of almost gives you credit over the long haul of you've played relatively well, like a Daniel Jones, every single week this season. So it's not just an average of, okay, if a guy grades a 74 every single game, he's not just going to average out to a 74 because he's played well every single week. You could grade a 74 every single week, kind of like what Daniel Jones is doing. And right now, I think his grade for the season is about an 80. And and honestly, I kind of respect that part about the grades, because it's like, okay, you're giving credit for this level of consistency and never bottoming out.
Dalton, shifting back to Notre Dame specifically, what has impressed you about the way Notre Dame's defense has improved since the start of the season?
I think there's been an adjustment to Chris Ash and just being, the new defensive coordinator there, and how to figure out, okay, how does he want to run this team? Because last year it was so aggressive and so man heavy, and you had so many NFL players, right? A couple on the defensive line, you had Xavier Watts on the back end. The improvement as the season goes on is big time. And then I honestly, if I had to point out a single guy, look, we probably talked about this last year. Leonard Moore is the best. He's the best corner in the country. I think the fact that they have started to base this defense more around his talents, and if they want to go man to man, it's about him. And it's about, the USC game is such a perfect example of the adjustments that they have to make. Because last year their defense was so good, they could just go into every game with the same game plan, and they knew they were going to dominate. This year, there's had to be more adjustments. But Leonard Moore, it to me, is the key to the entire secondary, especially with the ability to lock down anybody one-on-one. You saw that with him moving into the slot some against Mekhi Lemon against USC. But, you have that. And I think, to me, another thing is the defensive line is getting better as the season goes on, especially against the run. Something I noticed early on is they were kind of put to the test, right? Miami's got a top 10 offensive line. Texas A&M's got a great offensive line. They were put to the test early, and I think some of the guys, especially the depth on this defensive line, Boubacar Traore, Jared Dawson, right, Gabriel Rubio, these guys are stepping up as the season goes on, because there's a lot of veteran guys they lost on that unit last year. They're starting to get better as we get into the second half.
Yeah, I love the defensive grades, and I'll give you an example, and then I have a question for you that's totally unrelated. But Jason Anye had a score that was up in the upper 80s. He was the highest rated player on either side of the ball for either team in Notre Dame, USC. And if you look at his raw stats, 4 tackles, but you guys got the subtle pressures and so forth. I just really appreciate that part of the Pro Football Focus grading system. Now I'll go to somebody that's had up and down grades, and that's Christian Gray. What do you make of Christian Gray in the back end of Notre Dame's defense?
I mean, I think it's exactly what you just said. Is it's been up and down. There are moments with Christian Gray where you go, "Oh man, that is the guy." And the funniest game, really, the USC game kind of encapsulates it all in one, right? Where he gets heavily targeted because Leonard Moore is shutting it down on the other side. So you could argue there's no more pressure on anybody in Notre Dame's defense than there is on Christian Gray. We've seen this before, and I'll give him this. He's got a short memory. Even in this USC game, we've got him with 15 targets, 8 catches, and giving up 180 yards. I mean, he was so heavily targeted against a great receiver in Jacoby Lane, but tell you what, he made the interception happen when it matters. It feels like that's what it is with Gray, where he has his good games, and sometimes it can be a bit shaky, especially with as much man coverage as Notre Dame plays, but he does make plays when it matters. And certainly USC is sick of seeing him because they did the same thing, I think, against him last year. But no, I mean, cornerback play in that sense can be tough when you're so heavily targeted. And look, guys on the offense, especially great receivers, they're going to catch balls on you. That's kind of the battle. But I respect Gray a lot because he's really somebody who's under a lot of pressure to perform, because teams aren't throwing at number 15. So who's the next option? They got to get outside of number 6 out there. So it's tough. The grading does look tough at times, but he is talented, and there's a lot of games I see where he makes plays when it matters.
Dalton, you were talking about Ruben Bain earlier, and I think he might be the best player I've seen this season, and I get to watch Jeremiyah Love every weekend. But Boubacar Traore has sort of proven to be Notre Dame's best pass rusher. I'm curious, what's your sense of how he stacks up against some of the best pass rushers in the country?
Yeah, I mean, he's getting there. I mean, you talk about a guy he's another one. I think he's getting better as the season goes on. It fits right in with that defensive line, a season high 6 pressures against USC. That's big time. And I think that's something if Chris Ash wants to help in coverage more, because he doesn't have quite the same, he has Leonard Moore, but he doesn't have quite the same coverage unit that he did last year. If he wants to send more assets into the coverage unit, sitting linebackers back, allowing, maybe some more zone coverage than we saw last year, you need that 4-man rush going. And Traore is a guy who has stepped up off the edge. I can really appreciate that. And you look at, lately his 3 of his 4 best pass rush grades have been in the last 3 games. His best against USC this past week. If that continues and Chris Ash can rely more on a 4-man rush along with all the coverage assets he has back there, then you talk about a little bit of a change in the Notre Dame defense schematically from last year, but it suits this team better. It's a big development if Traore continues on this curve.
Dalton, a guy I wanted to ask about is Bryce Young. He changed his uniform number. I thought that threw people off, but there's times where they're saying, is he redshirting? Is he hurt? I think they expected him to be more of an explosive player. Now, when I look at his season grade, he's pretty solid. I mean, he's got a 70.9 season grade, and his other grades broken down are pretty consistent. What about Bryce Young? Is the film showing that maybe the casual viewer is not seeing?
I mean, he's a young kid, and he's improving from last year, right? You're talking about last year when he graded a 57. Now he's at a 70, and that's coming off his toughest game of the year against USC. So it went down a little bit after the USC game. But I think another guy, especially, we have to consider the run defense factor in this too, right? I think you have great linebackers, but you still want that defensive line to be solid in run defense, and they've been getting a lot better as the season goes on too. So you look at something like a 76.5 run defense grade, and you go, those are the quiet contributions that don't show up in the box score, right? That don't show up with the sack total or anything like that. So I think it's a lot like the rest of the Notre Dame defensive line, where this is somebody who's getting better. Tough game against USC, but USC is an awesome offense. I mean, that's one of the elite offenses in college football. So it's hard to expect him to just dominate snap to snap against an offense like that. I think he's improving. I think he's improved from last year. I think he's another guy in the stretch run, along with the rest of his D-line, who's going to continue to get better.
Dalton, when I think of versatility on Notre Dame's defense, Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa comes to mind, the linebacker who they'll line him up on the edge. As a pass rusher, he's done good things in coverage. He's been really good in run defense for Notre Dame. How does PFF value versatility? How does that play into, like, say, a defensive grade at the end of the day?
Well, it's big time, especially when you talk about linebackers. And I get asked this a lot about linebackers because people go, man, it just feels like it's such a hard job to do. And they ask me, what makes the best ones? And the first thing I tell them nowadays, especially with as heavily targeted as those guys are in the run game, when teams are trying to create light boxes, in the RPO game, when those are very often the guys in conflict, in coverage, when all these backs and slot receivers are coming at them in every direction, the ability to do everything is so valuable. We have Viliamu-Asa as Notre Dame's second highest graded defensive player behind Leonard Moore. Why? Because he's got an elite 88.6 run defense grade. That's great stuff. That's one of the best marks in the country. So he's great in run defense. 75 coverage grade. Really solid stuff. And then you mentioned the ability to get off the edge and rush the passer. And there's times when, Chris Ash can mess with the fronts a little bit. If he, instead of throwing a fifth defensive lineman out there, he can throw Viliamu-Asa out there, and he's got 15 pressures and a couple of sacks this year. Those are the guys that are so valuable that can do everything. There's so few of them in the NFL. There's so few of them in college football. It's the reason why a guy like Alabama's Shahad Campbell went in the first round, because he was the one linebacker in last year's draft that could truly do all three of those things anytime you want. And you see him doing similar things for the Philadelphia Eagles. So Viliamu-Asa, not just because he's talented, but because he can do all three of those things in all three facets, he's been extremely valuable to this defense. It's why he's their second highest graded player.
I got a couple more for you, Dalton. One is Elijah Hughes, transfers from USC defensive lineman. He's got a pretty high grade from you guys, and he has surprised us a lot. When you look at his game, what is he doing right? And did he surprise you guys? I mean, do you guys have expectations and say, wow, surprise?
No, I mean, it is surprising, considering especially that at times, coming from USC, those guys have struggled over there on defense the last couple of years. So it's not, it's one of those things, I would say, in my opinion, that, I too often look at USC's front seven and go, they're still struggling. And he's a guy who had a reasonable 65 grade last year, which is okay, but, it doesn't blow you away by any means. I think that he's another one. The addition of him more often into the lineup after those first two games, it's helped. And I think it shows you just the depth that the Fighting Irish have, where, how many defensive linemen have we even talked about on this show already that have been mentioned, right? They might not have that one superstar Ruben Bain type guy, but you get contributions, from Traore and then Hughes and then Rubio and then so many other guys. It feels like now that Notre Dame, maybe they don't have that one guy like Bain or a David Bailey for Texas Tech, but they've got 8 or 9 guys, and Hughes has added to that. I like that he played a season high in snaps against his old team in USC. He gives you a little bit of the pass rush. He's a solid high floor run defender, right? That's kind of what Notre Dame has added to this defensive line. It's a lot of high floor guys to me. So yeah, it's a little bit surprising. Again, USC has been struggling on defense the last couple of years. You guys saw that head-to-head a couple of weeks ago. But no, I mean, to get more guys like that, and that needs to be said too, like for the grades, you're going to have your superstars and guys who grade in the 85s and 90s and things like that. But it's also avoiding negatives that'll give your team a high grade. So the more guys you have like that, Hughes at a 75, this guy at a 70, and a lot of guys even in the 60s who are still productive players, even if they're not superstars, that adds to your football team big time. And the depth that's showing on their defensive line with guys like Hughes, that's really important to this defense.
I wanted to give you a chance to tell us about where everybody can see your content, Pro Football Focus's content. I stumbled across a YouTube show the other day that was outstanding. I know that there's podcasts you do. The grades are just part of it. So can you give us a rundown of where everybody can find your stuff, Dalton?
For sure. On PFF.com, you can get a PFF Plus subscription and look at all of these grades and numbers for yourself as far as NFL and college. And we've got great insight from a bunch of great analysts, including myself and Max and Trevor Sikkema and everybody. We've got a ton of analysts that break down so many things across the league and across college football. And then on YouTube, like you mentioned, I'm on the PFF NFL show and the PFF College Football show, the NFL show mostly with Trevor Sikkema, who's also our lead draft analyst, and the PFF College Football show with Max Chadwick. Like you mentioned there, we try to cover all the best games every single week. We got 12 previews this week. We don't have Notre Dame Boston College this week because we like your chances in that one, but there's going to be some games here down the stretch run. I think the tough one especially is going to be, well, actually, no, we'll have next week the Navy game for sure because Navy's been really good again this year. And then the week after at Pittsburgh, that's a sneaky one. That team's been really hot. So I can tell you right now, we're going to be previewing your next two games at least, and it's going to be fun to watch this team down the stretch of the season with the PFF College Football show on YouTube. Check it out, like and subscribe.
Yeah, it's great. I loved it.
I appreciate that big time.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Dalton. We really appreciate you taking time to join us today, and enjoy the rest of the season.
You guys too.
Take care.
Before we get back to the podcast, I wanted to share a word from our friends at Academy Sports and Outdoors. The most festive gear of the year is back at Academy Sports and Outdoors. Don't miss the limited edition Magellan Outdoor Christmas Market Collection only at Academy. Get exclusive 2025 gear and gifts for all your holiday parties, fun family photos, and Christmas morning traditions. Check out the entire collection from matching PJs and holiday print fishing shirts and dresses to exclusive new Mossy Oak Snowdrift camo styles and more. Shop in store or at academy.com. Need it fast? Get same-day delivery powered by DoorDash. Let your holiday fun begin with the Magellan Outdoors Christmas Market Collection only at Academy. All right, now it's time for questions. You can submit questions to us on Twitter or the Loose Emoji board before every podcast. I'm at TJamesND and Eric's at eHansenND. First one I have for us, Eric, is from Fightin' Mike 87 on the Loose Emoji board. Without looking to see what Vegas thinks, what would you set as the ND over-under for team rushing yards this weekend?
Name. So I'm not going to fight you on this. I think that I know what you want from me. I'm terrible with these over-unders. That's why I let Tyler do those. But let me give you a little bit of context for the number that I'm going to give you. Louisville ran for 317 yards against Boston College last weekend. They were, going into that game, the number 113th best rushing offense in the country at 115.7 yards a game. So they not quite tripled, but closing in on tripling their average. Stanford, who's now 129th, this is with this performance added in, so there's only 5 teams worse than them that the NCAA charts. They ran for 213 against Boston College. So I probably should set the over-under at 500, given how good Notre Dame isn't running the ball. I'm going to give it a 250 just to be conservative. But so that's where my number is. But Boston College run defense, it's skewed. It's worse than what their ranking is, which is close to, kind of in the 98, 100 range. I don't have it in front of me right now. It's worse than that because they played Fordham in their first game. Else is run all over them.
Yeah, I had a lower number in mind, maybe just because I wasn't sure how high I could put it to get people to keep betting the over. So I went with 204.5 yards. Notre Dame's hit 200 yards 4 times this season. So I think above that 200-yard mark would be where it would need to be. And I did not look up to see where it is at. I'm not sure what it is. So Fighting Mike will have to let us know how accurate or inaccurate our line is.
Yeah, I obeyed the orders of not looking it up.
Another one from Fighting Mike 87 is name a player not named Jeremiyah Love or Jadarian Price that you feel most comfortable about them scoring multiple touchdowns against BC. Bonus points for anyone having the stones to predict Eli Raridan scoring his first and second touchdown of the year.
I mean, I wouldn't rule that out, but I don't have the stones to predict that. Again, Boston, there's 5 teams, 5 defenses Notre Dame has left. All of them are a little bit better against the run than the pass. BC and Syracuse are almost equally bad at both. The other 3 teams are decent against the run. So I'm going to go with a receiver here, since that's Boston College's weak suit, and you're not letting me do Price or Love. So I'm going to say Jordan Faison. I feel like maybe he gets loose with some of those moves after the catch. He's going to get in the end zone if there's multiple touchdowns.
Yeah, Fighting Mike must be looking for some parlay help from us. If that's what I'm getting from these questions. He's looking for things that he could put together. I said Will Pauling just because I think going with the receiver makes sense. If you're getting rid of Love or Price, like, it's hard to imagine. I mean, maybe if it's that lopsided, a backup running back scores twice, but I don't know that I'd want to be rooting for that or counting on that. So I went with Will Pauling because he's found the end zone each game in the last 4 games. So he has something working now that might be more difficult to do if Jaden Greathouse returns this week. We don't necessarily know if he'll be out there this weekend. But I would go Will Pauling just because he's been having some chemistry with CJ Carr in the red zone. All right, our next question is from Ndigo Irish on the loose emoji board. Does Cam Williams catch his first touchdown this weekend?
I don't think that he will catch a touchdown pass. I think he might catch passes. He's listed as the number 2 boundary receiver this week with Micah Gilbert out, and I could see him getting some playing time. But I don't know that if the score is as lopsided as some of these questions are alluding to, and what my prediction was as well, I guess. I just don't think Notre Dame's going to be chucking it down the field to Cam Williams. But that'd be cool to see. He's the guy by far that doesn't play regularly that I get asked about the most.
Yeah, I would say no. I mean, I think what I was talking about in terms of, like, well, maybe a backup running back will score twice. I think that might be as likely as Cam Williams catching a touchdown. It's just he's got to get receptions in general before you can count on him getting his first touchdown catch. So I wouldn't expect that, but maybe he gets some action late in the game. All right, at Bobby Bancroft asked, is it reasonable to be concerned that we've seen the last of Jaden Greathouse in a Notre Dame uniform?
Where I will say, give you a little bit of rope there, Bobby, is I've seen so many things in college football this season, including, it feels like 10% of the coaches getting fired before the end of October, that you never want to rule anything out. But in this, I don't think it's reasonable. I think what's being implied, and maybe not in your question, Bobby, but in a lot of these, I get this a lot, is that this injury is not real and that it's just a smokescreen for him wanting to redshirt since it came at the 4-game mark, and that he intends to transfer and then he would preserve his eligibility. That's not how Jaden Greathouse, and that's not how Marcus Freeman does it. Last year when Jaden Mickey wanted to redshirt, he just said, I'm going to redshirt, I'm going to get my degree, and I'm going to move on. And I think Jaden Greathouse would do the same. And talking to sources, they're really excited about Greathouse eventually coming back when he's healthy and how well he will fit into the offense when that happens. So for me, I don't see that as a trajectory that has any reasonable thought to it.
Yeah, it's reasonable in the grand scheme of college football and the state of college football, but it's not as reasonable when you listen to any reporting that's been done around it. Because of that, it's more based on paranoia than reporting. I'm not sure that that's what's going on. And it shouldn't be surprising that Jaden Greathouse has a hamstring issue because he's had hamstring issues in the past. So it's not like that. It's not unreasonable that he could have a lingering hamstring issue that is preventing him from getting out in the field, and Notre Dame not being in a hurry to get him back out there when they have done okay without him too. All right, Bob Oxnard on the loose emoji board asks, how strong does the wind need to be to significantly impair the passing game? The wind forecast, when Bob asked this, says it looks like gusts to 33 miles per hour in Chestnut Hill.
I think it's a great question, Bob. I also am always leery of weather forecasts, not because people are wrong, but because the weather changes. I know we had a game recently at Notre Dame Stadium where the thought was that there would be wind gusts up to 35 miles an hour, and that didn't happen. But I think as a coach, you want to be looking at this stuff and you want to prepare for this. So that's why I love this question. Why I hate the question is I know nothing about that. So I actually turned to AI to help me. And this is what AI said. So I'm sourcing my material. I like to answer my questions with just plain old I. This is the AI question. So at 15 to 20 miles per hour, deep passes, those traveling over 20 yards, start to become noticeably affected. Where it's 20 to 25 range, that's when the impact becomes severe. Completion percentage drops significantly. Offenses tend to shift to a run-first strategy. Coaches will favor dink and dunk. So that's none of me answering that, but this is way out of my expertise, and I wanted to give you an answer.
Well, I don't know where AI got that answer, but I found an answer from the Athletics' Jake Seeley, who I believe is not a robot.
Not a robot.
And he had some information that said 15 and 25 are like the numbers to watch. At 15 miles per hour, you'll notice a slight downgrade in production, and at 25 miles per hour, it becomes more significant. So
it matches up with AI.
Well, the AI has to get it from someone else. They can't just make it up their own. That's not how AI works. But
maybe that's who they copied off of.
Well, yeah, but I'd like to give the human credit for doing the research.
Maybe he got it from AI.
I wouldn't accuse people of doing that. Weather.com said as of last night that winds were supposed to be 15 to 25 miles an hour. So that could be of note on Saturday. But like Eric said, like, forecasts are so unpredictable. Who knows what we'll actually see on Saturday at Boston College.
And it's a good thing Boston College is a crappy run defense.
All right, next question is from LDL Go Irish on the loose emoji board. I think Anthony Knapp can be a future All-American. I really like a lot of what I see in his run blocking, and I believe it will continue to get even better. His pass blocking needs more work, as he needs to clean a few things up. I'll skip the details. I remember when Chris Watt worked as an O-line graduate assistant. The best left tackle technician I ever saw at Notre Dame was Watt's teammate, the future Hall of Famer Zach Martin. He was shorter than the typical left tackle, just like Knapp. Is he available? Do you agree Zach was a stellar tactician and could help Anthony become the best version of himself?
Is Zach available to play left tackle for Notre Dame? He is now, right? He doesn't have any eligibility left unless he applied for a sixth year. When Harry Hiestand was coaching the offensive line for Notre Dame, a lot of those guys did come back pretty regularly. You saw McGlinchey and Nelson, and I think all those guys are welcome to come back. I mean, I think anybody could learn something from Zach Martin, even though he played offensive guard in his pro career. I mean, I think it would be wonderful for him to spend time. And the fact that Marcus Freeman invites, and makes alums feel so welcome and coming back, the door's open for that. I think your take on Anthony Knapp is interesting in terms of him being a future All-American. I don't think that lines up with what a lot of people on our message board say about him. But, this is a guy that started an entire season except for the championship game because of an injury at left tackle, and that he started the most games at left tackle of any freshman in the history of Notre Dame. And even if you just shorten it to the regular season, it's still unprecedented at left tackle he's the only player in Notre Dame history that did that at left tackle that started a complete regular season.
Yeah, I don't know that Zach Martin is interested in coaching. He made a lot of money playing offensive line. I don't know that he would be interested in coaching it. Like I can't imagine he would be wanting to be a graduate assistant like Chris Watt would be, but maybe he does. I don't know. Chris Watt now is in his third season with the Colts as an assistant offensive line coach. But yeah, I mean, I think if Notre Dame can connect the two, I'm not sure how much they've spoke or not. But anytime you can talk to someone who's as great as Zach Martin was, that would be beneficial. SM Pep on the loose emoji board says college and NFL football has shown that quarterbacks that are running threats are basically unstoppable. So why is Notre Dame recruiting drop back passers like Noah Grubbs and Teddy Gerard? Blake Hebert is more a dual threat, but why isn't Freeman stacking dual threat quarterbacks in back-to-back classes?
What I'll say before I hand this off to Tyler, because he's seen way more of Grubbs and Teddy than I have, is that Mike Denbrock, the offensive coordinator, likes quarterbacks that can put pressure on a defense. I do think next year you'll see a version of CJ Carr where he's a little bit more involved in the planned running game, and that he's going to be a better scrambler. Not that he's bad now, but I think you'll see him a little bit more involved in that as a redshirt sophomore. As far as those two, Tyler, take it away, because I have not watched film of either one of them. I didn't get the impression that either one was a statue, but maybe you have more info.
Yeah, I think they're capable athletes. I don't think they lack athleticism. They're not run first quarterbacks, and they're probably not as good of runners as Blake Hebert is. But I don't know that I fully buy the premise of the question. Like I don't think that running threats at quarterbacks are basically unstoppable. I think if that were the case, that the guys that would win the national championship every year would be Lamar Jackson, and that we don't see that. Those aren't the quarterbacks who tend to win national championships in college football. I think you have to have some threat with your legs, and I think Grubbs and Gerard may be capable of doing that. And I mean, CJ Carr, like Notre Dame's offense looks pretty dang good without CJ Carr being a constant run threat. So I don't think it's as simple as go get a dual threat quarterback, because that's what you need to have to win at the highest levels in college or the NFL. And I also think like athleticism has gained importance at the quarterback position. So drop back passers aren't necessarily how I would describe most quarterbacks either. Like they're not Peyton Manning's. Like that's not who we're talking, or Tom Brady's. Like those guys couldn't run. But more and more of the guys that are going to throw it more often and be more valued for their arms will be able to escape the pocket and extend drives.
Well, let's just go through the top 10 real quick and see what their quarterbacks are. I'm looking at the AP top 10 right now. Julian Sand, I mean, really good athlete. I wouldn't consider him dual threat. That's the number one team in the country. Mendoza at Indiana, same kind of thing. A&M, Marcel Reed, definitely a dual threat. Ty Simpson, not really. Gunnar Stockton's got some of that, but I wouldn't consider him a big dual threat guy. Oregon, Dante Moore. Dante Moore's a really good athlete. I don't consider him, a guy that's involved a lot in Oregon's running game. Ole Miss, they have two Simmons, and what's the D2 kid's name?
Trinidad Chambliss.
Yeah. He is a dual threat. Georgia Tech, Haynes King, huge dual threat. Vanderbilt, Diego Pavia, he'd be very much a dual threat. And Bear Bachmeier's got some athleticism to him. I would say when he was a recruit, he was classified as a dual threat. In the games I've seen BYU, I haven't seen him as involved with that. And then just to throw in also number 10 tied. There's two teams tied. Miami, Carson Beck definitely isn't. So you have quite a few guys that are successful not being dual threats and teams without dual threats.
Yeah, and I think what a dual threat quarterback can do is it hide deficiencies on the offensive line and at running back. And those aren't positions that Notre Dame should be weak at. Like, Notre Dame should have good offensive lines. It should have good running backs. So I think you don't necessarily need a dual threat quarterback to hide those deficiencies. All right. Next question is from Chuck DeLutis at Seahawk24. Is it just me, or is the risk/reward ratio for Christian Gray so bad that no business would buy him? Few interceptions do not make up for constant penalties and poor coverage.
Well, you heard Dalton Wasserman's assessment of Christian Gray, and our podcast guest last week, Dane Brugler, had some interesting comments as well. And that he said Christian Gray has the talent to be as high as a second-round pick if he can get more consistent. He said, he has the kind of talent that the NFL and traits that the NFL is looking for. So I do think the risk-reward for Gray isn't as bad as you're painting it, Chuck. I think that in my opinion, that he's worth the investment, that at some point you are going to get a more consistent version of him. What I base that on is just from talking to him, his character, his work ethic, his toughness, his mental toughness. I just think at some point that's going to be a great story. And, I could be wrong. He could be Mr. Inconsistent his whole career, but he definitely has the talent and he puts the work in to try to get better. And I think when you have a guy like that, I think he's worth investing in.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame football is a business, and they are buying Christian Gray. They believe the potential's there, and he's the best option for Notre Dame. And I think if Christian Gray went into the transfer portal market, there would be buyers for him. So I don't agree with the idea that no business would buy him. Can he improve? Of course, but he has talent and the mentality to withstand what comes with being a cornerback, and especially when you're playing opposite of someone who people don't like to throw against. All right, next question is from at Enforcers2117. What do you think the odds are that the coach Notre Dame plays this week is the next head coach at Penn State? Bill O'Brien did a good job at Penn State taking over for Joe Paterno the first go-around before he took off for the Texans job in the NFL.
Well, according to BetOnline8.ag, he's a 20-1 shot to be the next Penn State coach. For me, I don't see it happening. I think he did a good job under the circumstances. He was 15-9 in his 2 years there, 10-6 in the Big Ten when they had the legends and the leaders divisions. And then that was good enough to get him the Houston Texans coaching job. I think it's a real hard sell to sell the Penn State decision makers and the fan base on hiring a guy with a current 7-game losing streak. I mean, he's had some good jobs as an assistant. He worked for his last two. I think he worked for Nick Saban and for Bill Belichick as an offensive coordinator. Those are at least the pro version of Bill Belichick is an impressive guy to be around. But I don't think that that's the direction Penn State will go.
Yeah, I say no chance. You don't fire James Franklin to hire someone who was actively losing to UConn around the same time. So that would be a prudent move for Penn State. All right, next question is from at Charles W. Wolf. With Notre Dame under former defensive coordinator making the title game last year and former defensive coordinators beating him back to back, is it a stretch to say maybe the game has passed Brian Kelly by? I am grateful for the work he did to stabilize the ND football program, even if I wasn't crazy by the way he left.
Well, I think when you look at the once you get to the post Brian Van Gorder coaching hires of Brian Kelly as at defensive coordinators, those are three of the best young head coaches in the game. And Clark Lee at Vanderbilt, Mike Elko at Texas A&M, and Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. So I wouldn't base that on the game passing him by. And I don't think that's even the narrative. I don't think from an X's and O's standpoint that Brian Kelly doesn't get football, that he is obsolete when it comes to matching X's and O's. And whenever there has been a necessary evolution for Brian Kelly. He's made it before. The spread at Grand Valley State, the year before he did that, he thought he was going to get fired at Grand Valley State, and then installed the spread, and it became very this was when a lot of people weren't running it. His 2016-2017 reboot, he kind of remade who he was as a coach on and off the field, especially off the field. I think where the game has passed him by is in just listening to the commentary of former LSU players, and even Brady Quinn. Brady Quinn used to be in Brian Kelly's corner, and he doesn't recognize the version of him at LSU. I think Brian Kelly, in going to LSU and the way he coached down there, he went against a lot of the principles I thought Brian Kelly stood for when he was Notre Dame's head coach. And I think that's where Brian Kelly's evolution needs to be if he's going to get back into coaching, is he needs to adapt to the way the game is played, and he needs a more genuine approach to how he deals with players, how he deals with alums. I think that part of it is where Brian Kelly is behind the curve right now.
Yeah, I don't know enough about why it didn't work at LSU. I just don't have the time to dive into all that and to have monitored it at the same level that we monitored the Notre Dame program. But for whatever reason, he wasn't getting LSU to reach its full potential. I'm not sure that I buy the idea that the game has passed him by. It seems like there have been suggestions that maybe he wasn't as bought in to making it and feeling like it would happen rather than he needed to make it happen down at LSU. So maybe some hubris caught up to Brian Kelly down at LSU, but I'm speaking from a total outside perspective and not as educated on it as I'd like to be in terms of having a hard line view on it. All right, at Enforcers 2117, any guess where Brian Kelly will land if he coaches next year? My guess is either Michigan State because of his Michigan ties, and Stanford because he's used to the ND academic standards, and he could play ND every year. And not to mention, Michigan State will be back on the schedule 8-4, and he's a god there. LOL.
The Bet Online AG actually had Brian Kelly coaching odds. I thought that they were fun and interesting. Their leading candidate, and I can't see this as being a fit, was Arkansas at 3-1. I think of the teams that I saw in there, and he was listed as a candidate at some schools that didn't even have openings yet. I think UCLA might be a fit, but like if Brian asked my opinion, and this is what I think he might do if he's not knee-jerk about this, I think he probably would benefit from sitting out a year, from being like a TV guy for a year, and just kind of surveying college football, kind of recalibrating who he is and how he wants to approach a program, wait for a job where he is a fit, and then apply for that. So my answer would be sitting out the year, but if he's going to go somewhere, I would say UCLA.
Yeah, my guess would be he won't coach next year. I think if he wants to eventually continue to coach, I think the time off would be helpful. I think he could perhaps help his image by working in television for a year and then become a more attractive candidate. But I mean, back when Brian Kelly was coaching at Notre Dame, he didn't seem like someone. He had expressed that he doesn't want to be coaching until he dies. Like, so I don't think I would be shocked if that was Brian Kelly's last coaching job either. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up, but or if he sort of rides off into the sunset with a unfortunate ending to his career.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's ego involved in not wanting that to be the lasting impression. But I know, like, having talked with Brian both on and off the record about what he wanted to do, and his plan has changed. I don't think he thought he'd be coaching on his 64th birthday. He got fired a day after he turned 64. Is that he wants to be connected to the game somehow. So I think he will find a role with football somewhere, but it may not be coaching.
All right. The next question is from MGB Irish on the loose emoji board. Where all these rumors of other staff members on different sites saying they're hearing rumors of Freeman being unhappy with his resources and NIL at Notre Dame? How would these people hear that and not you guys? Is his agent saying this? Are we being too confident?
Okay, I'm going to let you answer this first, Tyler, and then I'm going to go second on this because I just think that would be safer for me.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what the rumors are that MGB. So I don't know how to address the rumors of the rumors that I don't know what the rumors are. I have not seen folks say that Marcus Freeman is unhappy with his resources and NIL at Notre Dame. So I don't know how someone would hear that, and we would not. I mean, certainly people can talk to different people and get different things, but I think I know one thing that I have seen was Pete Nakos, who covers college football at the national level for On3. I think when he mentioned Marcus Freeman on his hot board for the LSU job, he mentioned, I think the line had something to do with like recruiting at a place where there would be less academic restrictions might be attractive. I don't know if that's reported or an assumption. I don't know. I have not talked to Pete about that. I think that it's an easy leap to make. Even if you don't know what the academic restrictions are at Notre Dame, I think it's probably pretty safe to say that they're lower at LSU. But otherwise, I'm not really sure what MGB is alluding to.
You know, these are difficult questions to answer because if you list who the people are that are saying it and we say it's garbage, then we're pissing them off. And if you don't list who they are, it could be somebody in their underwear in their mom's basement. And I would assume that that's what you're talking about. I can't imagine that there's anybody that's credible that's actually saying this. And I think it's hard for readers and fans to sometimes understand what's real and what's not. You know, you go to your YouTube feed and things pop up in your YouTube feed and there's a nice graphic and there's somebody talking about Notre Dame football that's never been in a Notre Dame football game. And you think, well, this guy must know. It's got a flashy headline and it must be true. So I think you have to really understand and kind of keep score in your mind who you can trust. For me, it's garbage. And just like anything in life, you got to figure out who you trust, who are trusted sources. But to compare notes and why somebody that may not even be a legitimate media member and that's using AI scripts for their podcast, I mean, that's not somebody that's legitimate that you should listen to. But it's hard to understand because they present themselves in a fashion that is legit, and they're parasites. So I wouldn't pay attention to it. That's my take.
All right. Next question is from Marie Biafore at Biafore_Marie. Now that we're getting towards the last part of the season, how would you rate the transfer portal players? Are they better, about the same, or less impressive than you expected? Also, are there any players you've seen on the teams Notre Dame has played this season that Notre Dame might be interested in acquiring from the transfer portal next year?
I'm going to skip the second part of that question. I don't think it's fair to those players because I don't know if they would be interested in Notre Dame. I mean, there's a lot of players I've seen. Wow, Mario Craver and Casey Concepcion, those guys are really good players. And but I'm not going to, I don't think that there's any reason to think that they wouldn't like where they're at. So I'm going to skip that part. I do think the first part of it's fair to go with grading the incoming transfers. There were 8 of them, which is a record for scholarship transfers. As a group, I'd say they're probably about what I expected. I think there's been some individual that have been a little bit better, like Elijah Hughes. I think there's a guy like Jalen Stroman, who isn't maybe as good as I thought he would. I thought he would be starting or at least a heavy rotation guy at safety. And you've had some incompletes. The jury's out on Noah Burnett because he's been in and out of the lineup. Devontae Smith hasn't played half of his games. So, Ty Washington, I didn't expect a lot. Malachi and Pauling, I think they've done a really good job. And then Dawson, I think he's as good or as better as I expected from him. So overall, I think Notre Dame invested well, but it's, a mixed bag.
Yeah, and I did a full grade breakdown for each of the portal guys in on blueandgold.com last week. So if Marie's interested in that or anyone else is, you can check that out. In terms of how I'd stack them up in terms of better, same, or less impressive, I would describe Elijah Hughes as being better. Malachi Fields, Will Pauling, Jared Dawson, and Ty Washington as the same. And then Devontae Smith, Noah Burnett, and Jalen Stroman as less impressive. I'm also pleading the fifth on the other question. I'm not sure. To be realistic in terms of who would enter the portal, who could transfer academically to Notre Dame, I just don't know enough of that information at this point in time to give you names that would actually matter. I mean, I could throw out names of players who I think were impressive, but I'm not sure that's. We all watch the games. I don't know that's really adding any insight. So I don't know what to do about that question.
And Maria, it's hard when you look at the list that we just talked to you about. I don't know that we would have picked out any of those guys. Maybe Devontae Smith would have jumped off, and you thought, okay, well, if Devontae Smith, but I mean, he wasn't a guy that I saw play.
Malachi Fields, just because Notre Dame played Virginia, I think that one sort of makes sense. But
right, once I knew he was going in the portal and he was interested, I was like, yeah, Malachi Fields, that would be a really good pickup. But I don't remember watching the Virginia game saying, boy, they need to go get a guy like him. So a lot of those guys didn't play against Notre Dame last year either. I don't even remember Dawson when Louisville played him, but he did. He played against them. So.
All right, we will wrap up with a couple of questions from LDL Go Irish on the loose emoji board. First one, going into last week's games, I had 44 teams still capable of getting one of the 12 coveted playoff spots. Now I have 41. An unexpected conference winner can hurt Notre Dame's chances of getting a playoff spot, as you know. In what conferences might that happen?
Well, I think the numbers to kind of think about that you want to have happen to give Notre Dame the best chance of not getting into a heated debate in the room would be 4 SEC teams, 3 Big Ten teams, 2 ACC, and 1 Big 12. If you get a second Big 12 team in the discussion, somebody's going to get bumped that's a deserving team probably. As I look at it, there's not a ton of scenarios, but we're still early enough in the season where it could happen. Here's where I think is the most the one that would be least advantageous to Notre Dame. Right now in the ACC, you have Virginia and Georgia Tech undefeated in league play. And with not a lot of challenges left on their conference schedule, Georgia Tech plays Georgia, but that's not a conference game. And if those two teams ended up playing for the championship, then Miami could be a one-loss team. And now they're in the at-large pool with Notre Dame. So you have to decide between maybe Miami and Notre Dame, a Miami team with a better record and that beat Notre Dame. I think the other kind of danger zone, and there's a bunch of one-loss ACC teams that could get in there. Pitt, for example. Pitt could lose to Notre Dame and then beat Georgia Tech and Miami and somehow get into the title game against Virginia and then beat Virginia. That wouldn't be advantageous to Notre Dame either. In the Big 12, you just want parity to kind of reign. I think the team that you don't want to see winning the Big 12 is Houston, because they would not be a team that would naturally be in the top 12. They have one loss. There is a pathway for them to get into the Big 12 championship. you'd rather see BYU or Texas Tech be the Big 12 championship and then nobody else get in. I don't think you have problems in the SEC. I think they'll get their 4 teams in, and there's enough games against each other where they're going to have some of these really good teams right now are going to have 3 and 4 losses. Michigan beating Ohio State could be a problem because that could pull Michigan into the championship game against Indiana. And then Ohio State's getting in 2 and Oregon's getting in 2 unless they lost to USC. So if there's 4 Big Ten teams, that's problematic. That throws Notre Dame into a difficult debate. So those are the way I see it right now, but it'll become clearer with each passing week.
Yeah, you covered most of the ground there. Like in the Big Ten, the other sort of 1 loss in conference, 2 loss teams would be like if they went out and get into the Big Ten championship, like that would not be good. Like Iowa and USC, I think, are the other 2 teams that could do that with potentially. Not that I predict that to happen, but obviously you don't want that to happen. Yeah, Virginia and Georgia Tech winning out and playing in the title game would be bad because then I think probably both of those teams might get in, and then Miami might still get in. So you could see a world where the ACC got 3 teams in. I don't expect that to be what happens, but that could. And then the Big 12, like I think if Cincinnati were to win out and then one of Texas Tech and BYU winning out, then I think probably 2 teams get in from that conference as well. So those
Cincinnati plays some of the teams at the top. That's why I said Houston. Houston doesn't play any of those teams anymore. They lost to Texas Tech, but they don't play any of the leaders. Cincinnati, BYU, Texas Tech, they all play each other. So somebody's going to get knocked off in that group.
Right, but 2 of them, I think, at least when I've looked at it, I thought at least 2 of them could make it through without having to beat each other. But maybe I have that wrong. All right, LDO Go Irish also asked by both eye test and mathematical computations, which I will not share. The SEC easily ranks as the top and deepest Power 4 conference. The ACC just as easily comes in last, which may help ND win out, but hurts their strength of record. I have the Big 12 slightly higher than the Big 10, but very close. The Big 10 is stronger at the top, but not as deep as the Big 12. How would you rank the Power 4 conferences?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard. Do you root them from top to bottom? Do you rate them on playoff caliber teams? I tried to go with the spirit of your question. I think SEC has the best depth. They have some good teams at the top, but their middle class is very impressive, and even their crummy teams are pretty impressive. I think the Big Ten has 3 really good teams at the top. They have the number 1 and number 2 teams in the country and number 6. But I think their middle class isn't nearly as good. And I think there are some teams toward the bottom that are worse than the SEC teams. When you think about the teams at the bottom of who wants to play Mississippi State? I mean, they've been a problem for a lot of teams, and that's a winless team in the SEC. I think I'd rather play Purdue than Mississippi State. Then ACC and the Big 12 are the last 2. For me, the ACC is better. I think they've gone out and they have had better wins outside of their conference. I can't think of any team outside the Big 12 that those top teams in the Big 12 have gone out and beaten. ACC, I mean, Miami has the win over Notre Dame. There's some other good non-conference wins from their conference. The only thing that really makes the ACC maybe look bad to the Big 12 is West Virginia beating Pittsburgh, but that's one of those rivalry games where you throw out the records and West Virginia would want to throw out theirs. So that's how I would rate them. SEC, Big 10, ACC, Big 12.
Yeah, I was surprised LDL had the Big 12 higher than the Big 10. I'm not sure that the Big 12 has the wins out of conference. Like, I mean, Nebraska beating Cincinnati is like proof that at least Nebraska is not near the top of the Big 10. I don't think, and Cincinnati is near the top of the Big 12. So that would be the difference if you were looking for cross-conference things to measure. So I had SEC, Big 10, ACC, Big 12 as well. That was the order I thought of. I think I may be leaning more towards playoff worthy teams when considering that. But I mean, if we wanted to squabble over who has the worst bottom end of the conference, I'm just not sure that is what makes a difference in the end. All right, that is it for this week's episode of the Third and Gold podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast homes. Search for Notre Dame Football with Eric Hansen and Tyler James if you're not already subscribed to us on the proper feeds. We have plenty of written content over at blueandgold.com to get you ready for the Boston College game, so stick with Blue and Gold for all your Notre Dame coverage needs.